Douglas Adams, from The Salmon of Doubt, Hitchhiking the Galaxy One Last Time. Quote, "The fact that we live at the bottom of a deep gravity well, on the surface of a gas-covered planet going around a nuclear fireball 90 million miles away, and think this to be normal, is obviously some indication of how skewed our perspective tends to be." Good morning, and welcome back to the Anderson One podcast. I hope you're all doing as well as can be expected in the circumstances. The thing about big change like this is it always starts rather exciting, even in the morbid cases like coronavirus. But eventually, the novelty wears off, and one has to adjust to the new normal. The Douglas Adams quote is nice and symbolic of our time, I think. There is no normal, only what we perceive to be consistent. And that can all change in a heartbeat, as we are all currently experiencing. This week's theme is environment. And what a broad idea that can be. Perhaps when one thinks of environment, one thinks of something geographical, like a rainforest or a city. Or perhaps it's more to do with personal environment of your home and your workspace. Or maybe the atmospheric environment in that workplace or between a friendship group. I'd like us to think of environments in the geographical sense. Now, I spent my childhood in Hong Kong. The population at the time was about 6.5 million. It has about the same land area and population as London. So just imagine London, but as an island. Age 10, I moved to where I consider to be my childhood home, the Isle of Man. And I spent every day for the first week going outside and breathing the cold and, most importantly, the clean air. Now, the Isle of Man has a land area of about half the size of Hong Kong, but the population is only 80,000 people, which is a crazy change mathematically. It's about 1% of the population, but spread out over half of the land area. And the Isle of Man's environment reflects that. Now, if I case study the Isle of Man for a moment for environment, the Isle of Man, as of 2016, is a designated World Biosphere site by UNESCO, which is the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organisation. Now, a biosphere is simply a part of the Earth and its atmosphere that supports life. But a World Biosphere site is a recognised special place for people and nature. Now, the Isle of Man's environment is interesting to think about because it earned the recognition of being a biosphere site due to its many protected and preserved areas of nature, whilst also being a place where people live and work. Some notable points: its territorial waters contain rich biodiversity, including sabellaria reefs and seagrass beds. The waters also include wild marine animals such as seals, dolphins, basking sharks and minke whales. The commercial fishing footprint is contained to well-used fishing grounds, which means it has a minimal impact on protected marine environments. The Isle of Man's mixed farming industry accounts for about 80% of the land use, with a small number of native mammals including 8 species of bat, stoats, which look similar to weasels, brown and mountain hares, hedgehogs, polecats, not to mention a wild population of about 150 marsupial wallabies. It has these and many more interesting enriched wildlife integrated with the general population of people who travel in cars and use electricity and, as a matter of human principle, concrete over things. So I thought it'd be interesting to think about this first of all, and here are a couple of audio clips from the Isle of Man's promotional video when they received the Biosphere Site status. And the first comes from Anne-Marie Kilgallen from the Manx Wildlife Trust.
If I've had a really hectic day in the office, I can go and walk out on the beach at the Airs. I can walk up Cronkneary Ley, and just looking at the views there and benefiting from the wildlife, from the the natural world around you, it really helps to put any problems you've got into perspective. I think we're very, very lucky in that our sort of main population areas are literally within a few minutes of access of coast, countryside, where people can get out and really enjoy the benefits of of such an environment. It's incredibly important that we're active guardians. Obviously, you've got dedicated organisations like ourselves, but if you think about the number of people who voluntarily come and join our work parties, it goes across the whole community basically, so yeah.
Next is Phil Gaughan, former Minister for Isle of Man Environment, Food and Agriculture.
In terms of managing the environment, I think our fisheries sector is becoming more sustainable and generally not very, very intensive agriculture taking place in the Isle of Man either. So our farmers work with us and with the environment to ensure that we have this fantastic place.
Now, if we think about where we live, London, it is a very different place altogether. People don't move to London for the wildlife, but for everything else that it has to offer. Now, currently, we're not living in the London that we know due to the coronavirus lockdown, and it's interesting to see what effect this is having. Now, according to a 2013 publication on carbon footprint of UK cities, the average person in London produces about 15 tonnes of carbon dioxide a year, compared with an average of about 12 tonnes per person for the rest of the UK. New research from the US Energy Information Administration suggests that, since the lockdown, the UK emissions have dropped by 48%. We've halved our carbon footprint. That's amazing. Now, this is great news as a result of something bad happening. Statistics from Flight Radar 24 saying that there are 71% fewer planes in the sky than before the pandemic. Of course, air travel is not the only cause of carbon emissions, but it is a massively contributing factor. Data from the Centre for International Climate Research, CICERO, found that in February there was a 20 to 30% decrease in air pollution worldwide. Things are changing, and it's because of the pandemic. This information triggered a memory from an episode of QI, which also discusses carbon emissions in the wake of a disaster. So here's a clip from Series I, Episode 16, with Stephen Fry hosting, Alan Davis, Brian Blessed, Sean Locke and Ross Noble as guests.
In what way is Iceland's most recent volcano similar to Genghis Khan?
I think I know what it is.
Yes, go on.
I think, obviously, that volcano stopped lots of transport going on.
Yes.
He must have stopped something happening, which the volcano stopped happening.
You're in this right area. The odd thing is it's both very beneficial, especially at the moment. It's a thing we talk about a lot. Now, that volcano poured out, they reckon, between 150,000 and 300,000 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So there's a huge amount of carbon came out as a result of it. But if you remember, no one flew for however long it was, and the lack of flying saved 3 million tonnes. So, in fact, it was a huge offset of carbon. And in the case of Genghis Khan, he slaughtered his way across the world and had the largest empire the world has ever seen, 4 times bigger than that of Alexander, twice the size of the Roman Empire. And he killed about 40 million people. And the result was there was so little farming that the forests grew back. And you can time a huge benefit to the world from his slaughter. But that's rather extraordinary, isn't it?
Perhaps this could be the beginning of a global effort to seriously reduce carbon emissions with meaningful results. On a macro scale, pollution and carbon emissions are drastically reduced. On a micro scale, deer from Dagenham Park have been grazing outside housing estates in Harold Hill. London is never going to gain a World Biosphere site status. That's not the point. But the world is suddenly a little more woke regarding what essential travel means, for example. And if we can start there to help our environment, then that just might be a good start. Sabrina Faramasi's Vice article, How Coronavirus Lockdown Has Actually Affected the Environment, concludes by saying, quote, "A couple of months of decreased emissions is nothing on the decades of accumulated carbon dioxide still in our atmosphere, and only real structural change can make a lasting impact. If governments acted with the same urgency on climate change as they have on COVID-19, we might avoid future catastrophes that could be bigger and much more calamitous than a pandemic." With so much more to think about and many actions to take, I turn the thinking over to you. What do you think? What are your thoughts on the environment? Do you have any interesting facts that you might be able to share? Have you watched any interesting programs like Planet Earth? Let me know. Thanks for listening. And echoing Faramasi's sentiment, I conclude today's podcast with a clip of David Attenborough, taken from a discussion panel on the BBC4 programme The Selfish Green in 2005.
And of course, every broadcasting organisation ought to be ventilating these issues. I would wish that we did more. But what we're talking about requires very big changes, and which will require people not just paying lip service, but really believing it is true and putting things behind it. Now, that means that they ought to be converted. They ought to actually think that the natural world is precious. And unless that is step one. If they don't think that, then they aren't going to make the sort of sacrifices that that is necessary to be made. And that's why all of us in this festival are engaged in the business, I believe, because we get huge delight and pleasure out of seeing these things, and we believe they're precious, and others ought to see why that is so. The world is changing, and the world has changed. And 50 years ago, 40 years ago, if someone suggested that the ecology or conservation had to be a plank on anybody's political platform, you would have been laughed out of court. And the fact of the matter is that now there are politicians, maybe ham-fistedly, maybe wrong-headedly, but there are politicians who are charged with responsibility of looking after the environment. Now that is a move forward. There are international organizations in the United Nations who are also, there is an environmental program. Now, if they'd been wonderfully successful, we wouldn't be talking this way now. Of course they aren't. But we are moving. It is possible to change. And of course, I'm concerned, like everybody else is here, but let us not suppose the case has yet been lost, because it hasn't. Things are moving, things are changing, and it's up to us to keep them changing and increase the pace. We must keep going, and I believe we will shift things. How far?